Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I shall, of course, speak English, which is my native language, but I just want to say first a few words of thanks to my hosts in German, which would have been my native language, but for the small accident of the Third Reich. Meine Eltern stammten nämlich aus Nürnberg und Deutsch war immerhin meine erste mündliche Sprache, wenn ich auch vollkommen englisch erzogen bin. Und wenn ich das Vergnügen habe, in Deutschland zu gastieren, geschweige denn sozusagen einen Vortrag zu halten, habe ich immer das Gefühl, dass ich mich in einer irgendwie mystischen Vorexistenz oder alternativen, hypothetischen Existenz befinde, wo ich hätte hier leben können, aber das Leben hat sich halt anders gestaltet. Ob das heißt, dass ich mich hier zu Hause fühle, weiß ich nicht sicher, aber es macht mir wenigstens Spaß, wenn ich auch in Berlin sehr davon bewusst bin, dass ich eben Nürnberg-Fränkisch bin und nicht Berliner sozusagen. Wenn die Rede kommt auf, ich weiß nicht, Musiker aus dem fernen Osten, rede ich nicht vom chinesischen Orchester, sondern eher vom chinesischen Orchester. Aber immerhin bin ich für die Einladung und die Gesellschaft sehr dankbar. Thank you very much. Let me now turn to the more serious subject of the euro. In order to understand the argument, the dispute, and the position of the euro in European affairs, it is necessary to draw attention to a basic feature of economics, and that is the contrast between the quasi-scientific, the rigorous, the logical, the mathematical core of economics, and the much larger part, which is not quasi-scientific, but which is concerned with political choice and values and arguments about institutions. Just to give an example, the logical core of economics shows that on certain reasonable assumptions, not inevitable, but reasonable, a system of decentralized decision-taking through markets to determine both consumption and production of goods and services will, in a certain sense, maximize the welfare of society. Around this core of economics, there is first of all the possibility that the society may break down and may not function at all and may fail to secure full employment of all the population. And we had this experience, of course, in the earlier part of the 20th century, which meant that for a long time there was a theoretical and ideological battle between the notion of market economics and the notion of centrally planned economics in the Soviet style. With markets working satisfactorily, that battle ended in a clear victory for markets. But that only takes us into another area where there is a huge scope for political argument, a political choice, how markets should be managed, should be regulated, how the necessary role of the collective authorities in the provision of law and order, of human welfare, of relief of poverty, should be achieved through taxation and public expenditure, the choice of taxes, the choice of institutions for administering public expenditure. All this is not proven and determined by theoretical analysis, but is the subject of political argument, legitimate political argument. Now, when it comes to the euro, to the matter of money and currencies, there is a similar distinction to be made between the logical core of the subject and the political disputes surrounding it. In the logical core of the subject, what we are talking about is minimizing the costs of conducting business in a market system, the costs of exchange. Money is a medium of exchange. It is not the goal of our activities. It is a useful tool for achieving them, and in particular, for minimizing cost. Rather than engage in barter trade and exchanging motor cars for haircuts for food products, we have a general medium of exchange, which is money. And the wider the area over which a particular medium of exchange is accepted, the easier and cheaper is the organization of trade and production. And in ancient times and in the Middle Ages, such naturally scarce materials as gold formed the basis of the medium of exchange to minimize the need for barter between one good and another. In our days, of course, what we know as monies or currencies do that. Now, logically, of course, in the age of globalization, if you pursue this à outrance, as they say in French, you would want one single money for the whole world. And as I shall point out a little later in my talk, there was a period of several decades before World War I when we actually came very close to achieving such one money for the whole world, namely the gold standard. For reasons which I will enlarge on, that of course is not the situation today. And everybody would agree that the idea of a single currency worldwide is not, for various reasons, realizable. So the question is, how close to it can you get? And one set of political ideas says, well, you should have a single currency in order to maximize the unity of an area, a set of countries with political ambitions to be a single unit, such as the European Union. In other words, the money in Europe takes on not only the function of a means of exchange, but the additional function of a symbol of unity, like the flag, you know, the circle with the stars. It's a sort of symbol of ambition rather than just a useful tool for realizing economic gains. I should just point out, before moving on, very interesting, there exists nowadays, there has existed for a few years, a Nobel Prize for economics. It would be a great mistake on the part of this audience or anybody else to assume that a Nobel Prize for economics is the equivalent of a Nobel Prize for medicine or chemistry or physics. It has a great deal more in common with a Nobel Prize for peace or literature. It has an element in common with the scientific ones because, as I said, there is a core of scientific rigor in economics, but it is only the core. And whether someone achieves prominence in the field of economics does not depend solely on their scientific prowess. It depends also on their success as a controversialist or an advisor or a finder of compromise between pure logic and political realities. Now, to give an example, to make this more concrete, I want to refer to a paper which you all have, and I was handed out also, in both German and in English translation. It's headed "The Evolution of Economic Governance in the EMU," the Economic and Monetary Union. And there is a list in the first paragraph. I'm not quite sure where it comes from. It may come from the so-called Five Presidents report, but it comes somewhere from the air of bureaucracy. There is a list of 7 points, 7, as we say in English, bullet points, purportedly relevant or furnishing a guideline to the creation of a monetary union. Let me just read them. The monetary union is considered to be desirable if members share the following criteria. 1, a low degree of nominal rigidity in prices and cost, such that the role of the exchange rate system is limited. 2, a high degree of mobility of labor and physical capital. 3, a low degree of dispersion of expected inflation. 4, similarities in the vulnerability to macroeconomic shocks. 5, a similar degree of economic openness. 6, a high degree of financial market and fiscal integration. And 7, a high degree of political integration among participating states. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you find that thoroughly confusing, because it is. 4 out of these 7 can be immediately deleted as completely unhelpful and irrelevant. Expected inflation, vulnerability to shocks, economic openness, financial and market integration, it really has nothing to do with it. There are only 2 basic criteria which matter, put together out of the remaining 3. The one is the degree of rigidity or flexibility in nominal prices, and particularly in nominal wages. More generally, the degree of flexibility of the labor market, because, of course, an alternative to changing your wage or your salary if you find yourself out of a job is to move to another job, which may mean moving to another area or another country. So movement of labor is another element of flexibility of the labor market. And the difference, of course, between monetary, I say this quickly, between monetary union among a number of countries and monetary union of a single country is that on the whole, people don't mind moving from one part of a country to another. And culturally and in terms of human identity, movement within a country does not provide major upsets. Whereas movement across countries is much more controversial. Well, I don't need, after the sessions on immigration, to remind this audience of that, except, of course, we should add that the ultimate risk for a single country, the ultimate risk, is total depopulation. We talk about the brain drain from a country like Greece, which is currently suffering from its membership of the Monetary Union. And the ultimate threat is not merely a brain drain, but mass depopulation of the whole country in search of jobs elsewhere. Now, I cite the example of Greece deliberately, because this is where we see this paradoxical conflict between the logical core of economics and the political choices connected with it. Despite the obvious damage to which there is no end in sight to the Greek economy from its membership of the euro, in terms of unemployment, performance, I needn't go through the list. The Greeks, through their democratic process, such as it exists, and you can't ignore it, they have chosen to remain members of the single currency. Now, in a mad way, you have to respect that. It wasn't chosen at pistol point. They chose it, despite the deplorable economic state in which their country finds itself. And there is no sign either of them changing their minds or of the economy improving its performance. Time will tell. I can mention one other country where we take for granted that there's a single currency, and that is Italy. We're all used to the fact that there is, in fact, a serious economic division between northern and southern Italy. But nobody very seriously imagines that southern Italy should declare independence. I mean, the Northern League is thinking about declaring independence in the north. But on the whole, we take the unity of Italy for granted because the degree of political integration, my last bullet point, in Italy, despite the economic divisions, is high enough to make it unlikely that the population would wish or indeed would succeed in establishing a separate currency for the South. But you can't take it for granted. Now, very quickly, in order not to override my time, let me enlarge slightly on the economic history point I mentioned about the 1870 to 1914 period. The international gold standard, which covered not only Europe up to the borders of Russia, but through the colonial empires and other relationship, a large part of the rest of the world economy was able to function basically because the flexibility of money wages and hence of money value added in each individual country was large enough to compensate for the absence of flexibility in exchange rates. Okay, exchange rates were fixed through a fixed value in gold, and money wages moved. If you want to replicate that system today, you have to ask yourself whether it can be done in an era when not only have we gone through 100 years of history since then, I'll come back to that, but where technology is fundamentally different today, and above all, where the labor element in production costs is a much larger percentage of total production costs than was the case before 1914, when international trade and production was very heavily in primitive, relatively primitive industrial goods, in which the raw material component, and the prices of raw materials are, of course, naturally flexible, was much larger than it is today. You have only to compare a steam engine with a computer, or indeed, domestic service with professional services of doctors and lawyers, to see that the labor element in today's costs is much larger and much less flexible than it was in those days. And in fact, the lesson of economic history since the 1920s has been that we must be prepared in the event of extreme equilibrium among a group of disequilibrium among a group of countries to alter the exchange rate as a means of making the price system work more effectively. And individual countries, including first and foremost my own, but also France and others, inflicted damage on themselves from time to time through a failure to allow their exchange rate to move in a timely manner. Just my last thought, of course, inflicting damage on themselves, it would be dishonest of me not to mention, in conclusion, the counterexample of a country inflicting excessive prosperity on itself at the expense of its neighbors and at the expense of potential political harmony, meaning, of course, today's Germany, which has an altogether excessive surplus on its external current account, and which risks, in effect, finding itself with a mass of unpayable international credits vis-à-vis other countries, which could cause great political resentment and hurt when they turn out to be not payable. There is no doubt in my mind that from the world, and indeed Germany's own optimal point of view, the best modification, it's only a modification to the single currency that could be brought about, is for Germany to exit, resume the Deutschmark, upvalue, and let the euro be the currency of slightly less overwhelmingly strong, commercially strong countries, and proceed on that basis. I will take the applause as a hint to shut up. Thank you very much.